What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I wanted to pose the question, is Zoodiac truly dead? Because recently at an LLDS, a local Legend Duelist series held event, a Zoodiac Stun variant actually managed to take 4th place. And that's a really big deal considering that on the most recent October ban list, both Dryden and Broad Bull were banned. And a lot of us made the argument that if both of those cards were banned, that Zoodiac was essentially just completely dead, because it just makes no sense that its main key searcher that pretty much is its ultimate bearing of consistency, along with its massively oppressive monster, you know, those two cards kind of in tandem are the reason why Zoodiac was so powerful. But obviously the deck is still capable of doing something in this current format. So I wanted to kind of discuss the deck, talk about the current meta implications, and also the future meta implications as well, since Circuit Break is right around the corner. So I'm going to go ahead and slide on over here, and we're just going to go ahead and get right into it. So as you can see here, this is the list that he ran. His name is Yuri Landsman, just to give him some credit. And as you can see, it actually looks like, for the most part, a fairly typical, I guess what you would call new age Zoodiac standard build, because you're maxing out on your Zoodiacs, you're maxing out on your hand traps, I mean playing the 3 Ogre, the 3 Ash, and you still have all of your consistent pieces like Tenki and Barrage as well. Remember, one difference between us and the OCG is that Barrage is actually still at 3, and I think Barrage being unlimited is actually a reason why this deck is still as consistent as it is, because it gives the deck just that extra layer of an extender that it really needs. Because for the most part, if Barrage is out, you don't really have a good follow-up play. Like if your Ram or your Whiptail or your Thoroughblade just get hit by really anything, your turn is basically over. But to be fair, you have, you know, this 13 trap lineup in addition to Barrage that can also potentially save you as well. So you kind of have to think this deck has to kind of take on a new form, because obviously we have stuff like Pendulum Magician that's, you know, basically at full power, if you want to say that, as well as, you know, True Draco, which did take a significant hit with Dynamite getting banned as well. But the deck is still incredibly powerful because Masterpiece and Diagram are both still at 3. So I think that actually makes a really big difference in terms of how this deck can really compete, because without Dryden, it actually makes the deck a lot more, have a much more difficult time dealing with these types of decks. But I wanted to discuss this because I want to take you guys back to when Cleefort Stun was a thing. Because if you guys remember around 2015-2016 era, Cleefort kind of took on a new form as well, where essentially they were just playing some clean monsters and then just maxed out on every single floodgate in the game. And the old saying goes, when in doubt, flood them out. And that's pretty much what Cleefort did. It just maximized on every single floodgate imaginable in the game, and it managed to work really well for itself, even though maybe it wasn't the most consistent build, but it managed to get some wins here and there. And I think Zoodiac is kind of having a bit of a identity crisis, but also I guess sort of a renaissance as well, because it's kind of reimagining its identity here. And I feel like if Zoodiac's going to have any sort of competitive success in the future, this is kind of the variant it's going to have to take. I mean, if you guys remember, in the OCG, they have Macrocosmos at 3, and Zoodiac actually was playing Macrocosmos at 3 to help combat some of these other decks. Macrocosmos actually has a really big impact against your Pendulum Magician matchup, and your True Draco matchup, and hell, even your ABC matchup. So I feel like Macrocosmos is a really good call, especially if you're considering playing a Zoo Stun variant like this, be it, you know, OCG had it at 3, so it was a lot more easier to pull off, because honestly, it doesn't really matter too much. Obviously, it disrupts with your Chakanine and your Tiger Mortar, but you're basically, the payoff you get from playing a card like Macrocosmos has so much more value, because it's hurting your opponent way more than it's hurting you, because you can just continuously just pump out these Zoodiac monsters every turn, but if they're not getting the advantage of all of their cards, like their True Draco cards when they hit the grave, or their Pendulum cards are being banished when they leave the field, then that actually has a very substantial impact on the way those decks function, at least at a core level. So I find this really fascinating, because the deck actually still managed to function. Now, I think that if you're going to play a Zoo Stun variant like this, the biggest issue is you're relying more on your traps more than you actually are the Zoodiac engine component itself, because if you take the traps out of the equation here, you're basically left with a deck of all Zoodiac monsters, and yeah, you know, you have Whiptail for removal, which is, you know, a pretty good form of removal, but without Broad Bull, it's a bit less consistent, and you're not able to get a Whiptail every single turn to constantly put the pressure on your opponent. You've got Thoroughblade, which is good for damage, and also it lets you cycle through cards, and then you can just recurse stuff with Chakanine or Tiger Mortar, so I guess that has some bearing as well. But if you take the whole trap component out of this deck, it really becomes lackluster, so the traps are almost the bulk of the deck, and what you really need in order for this deck to, you know, work and function successfully, because if you can draw into your copies of Mistake, if you can draw into your Unending Nightmare, I mean, these are really good meta calls, especially when we're in a meta that's currently dominated by, you know, Pendulum Magicians, Draco, even ABC to that extent. I mean, you could even go and maybe play Anti-Spell in this deck as well, because your spell component of your deck is so much lesser than it used to be. I mean, Zoodiac were playing a ton more spells before, but now that you have a much smaller spell lineup, you can even play Anti-Spell, and that's just, you really just need to have just like a ton of floodgates in this deck, because if you don't see any floodgates, you're basically just fucked, and this deck isn't going to function in the way you might want it to. But, I mean, you have to think, if you're able to get stuff like Anti-Spell, or like your Mistakes, or your Unending Nightmares, or hell, you can even maybe play stuff like Rivalry of Warlords, because the deck is all Earth and all Beast Warrior, or hell, even Gozen Match. Like, there's so many different floodgates that are actually viable for a stun component like this, that it is very reminiscent of me, for me anyway, of the Klee stun builds, because Qliphort Scout was essentially the card just generating your resource, and in this case, you've got Barrage, you've got Tanky, you've got a million other things that kind of act as a Qliphort Scout, even though I guess Broad Bull would probably be the most similar to Scout in this instance, but you have enough ways in this deck to be able to generate the advantage that you need. And then you have all the floodgates, which since the archetype, again, like Klee, they're all the same type, they're all the same attribute, and there really isn't a downside to playing a lot of these floodgates. Yeah, sure, Mistake can hurt you because you kind of don't have the ability to search with Tanky, but with Broad Bull gone, Mistake isn't nearly as bad because you aren't really relying on Broad Bull for your searches, so you can't really search anything out anyway, so it hurts decks like Pendulum Magician, who do a ton of searching in a turn. Same thing goes for True Draco. ABC does a fair bit of searching as well. Spirals, which is what I want to get into next, is just another huge component as well, because they do an immense amount of searching, and something like Mistake can really cripple that deck's strategy. Then you also have stuff like Mirror Forces. The Mirror Forces, you know, being battle traps, are very good and are just very good at just removing all of your opponent's resources from the board. You've got the Solemn engine, so honestly, if I were building a deck like this, I would want to max out on maybe like almost 20 traps, because those are the bulk of your deck, and that's really what you need for this deck to function well. You've got stuff like Ogre and Ash, and honestly, Ash is a really good call right now, but instead of these Ogres, I feel like for a deck like this, these need to be something like traps, because if you play more traps, you're just going to be able to flood them out even harder than something like Ghost Ogre and 1-for-1ing, because this deck isn't able to keep up in tempo like it used to with its other variants. So I feel like you just need to go all out and play as many floodgates as possible to really see some sort of success with this build. Now, I do want to talk about Spiral, because that is the big elephant in the room, mainly because it's the deck that everyone's hyping up that's going to be the best deck moving forward. We still have yet to see that at the time of me recording this video, but Spiral is going to be a really big deal, and you know, you've got stuff again like Mistake, and you've got all these other floodgates, like if you play Anti-Spell, that can really hurt the deck as well. There's so many different things that you could potentially play. They have a typing issue and an attributal issue, so you could play like Gozen Match and Rivalry to really disrupt their ability to summon multiple monsters on the board, and that's a really big deal because they basically just need 2 monsters to get double Helix, and then they're off to the races. But if you're able to stop that, again, with Strike, with Warning, with Gozen Match, match with Rivalry. Then you have a really good shot at locking them out because that typically ends their turn for the most part, and then they don't really have a lot they can do. You're also going to have some difficulty going second because then if you start playing a build with 20 traps in it or something along those lines, then, you know, going second it's going to be really, really rough for you. But those traps, even if you're going second, stuff like Rivalry and Goes in Match are still very effective at pretty much clearing the board of your opponent's monsters, so there is the potential for something like that to actually work, even if you're going second and beyond turn 1. So, guys, that's it for my video. I really just kind of wanted to talk about this Zoodiac anti-meta build a little bit more in depth, but I'm really curious to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments below, so be sure to let me know what you think. Do you think this is really a viable strategy moving forward, or do you think this is just maybe a one-off that just happened to maybe work because it just happened to be one of those events where that happened? But I'd really love to hear your thoughts, guys. Thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you really found this video informative, consider backing me on Patreon, because just by pledging only $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.